You're listening to the Lima Baptist Temple podcast, where you can hear the latest messages and other conversations as we strive to go, serve, and love in our communities. If you want to know more about us, visit us online at limabaptisttemple.org. If you enjoyed our podcast, be sure to subscribe and check us out on YouTube.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Lima Baptist Temple podcast. My name is Ben Anderson. I'm an associate pastor here at the church, and my sidekick is Pastor Michael Green.
What's up?
Not much. We're just ready to hang out and have a great podcast. But as always, thank you so much for joining us every single week. As always, I'd like to remind you guys, Tuesdays, we release the message in podcast form. So make sure always check that out. Then Thursday afternoons, our Conversations podcast. Yep. So typically that's Pastor Michael and I hanging out, talking about different topics that you want us to talk about, and kind of sometimes topics that we want to talk about. Yeah. So it kind of depends on the week. But if there is something you want us to talk about, make sure let us know. Head on over to our website, limabaptisttemple.org. /Central Hub. There's a lot of different forms there, or several that you can fill out. Just make sure that we know you're talking about the podcast.
Yeah.
So we'd love to wrestle with the things that you have questions about. So, Michael, last week Sunday was Father's Day.
Yeah.
Did you have a good Father's Day?
Yeah.
Probably should ask you that.
I'm trying to remember what I did. It's kind of a distant memory now.
Yeah.
It's been a few days.
I just relaxed. It was nice. My parents actually came in town and took, my two oldest.
Wow. Well, I actually went to pick up my kids because I had officiated a wedding that weekend. Yep. So after church, we drove 2.5 hours to Michigan. We hung out there, grilled out, swam for a little bit, and then drove 2.5 hours back. So you left your kids on Father's Day. I went and got my kids on Father's Day.
Hey, yin and yang. I guess that's how it works.
Yeah.
But it was a great Father's Day, and we're kind of somewhat keeping with that theme for the next couple of weeks. But as parents, we get asked all sorts of questions. Some are easy, like, hey, tell me about Jesus. And that's, that might be easy for us. And sometimes they're a little bit harder. But through the filter of parenting and fatherhood and what it means, to be a mom, over the next 2 weeks, I thought it'd be fun for us to answer two questions. So this week, we're going to wrestle with, what does it mean to be a man?
Okay.
Based on, scripture and what the Bible says. And then next week, we'll talk about what does it mean to be a woman.
What we won't talk about.
Correct.
Yeah.
We'll bring in some experts for that. So we're working on that. It'll be a great couple of weeks. But it's important for us parents to kind of understand that and just be able to...
Well, and it's important, too, that we have a defining role of what it means to be a man, especially in today's culture.
Yeah.
With so much things going on in the culture, that we need to define what does a biblical man and a biblical woman really look like.
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, even like if you look at it from the culture's point of view, I mean, just think of, we talked a little bit about this last week, but, we're goofy. We're always getting in trouble. Yeah. We're kind of in this, especially younger men, right?
Yeah.
Like 20 to 30s, like it's almost like you still are a kid.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to take responsibility, and we'll talk about some of that more, but there's a lot there to unpack. But yeah, so the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be a biblical man? What does it mean to be a biblical woman? We'll bring in some guest professionals for that. But today, what does it mean to be a biblical man? So my kids have not asked me that question.
I haven't got that question yet either. But I mean, ultimately, we're trying to train them in that already.
Correct.
Like we're already doing things, that we're going to talk about later to push them down that path.
Yeah, and hopefully they're seeing us, live out these things. So it's not so much, our kids are kind of young still. They're probably they're not thinking in that mentality yet. But eventually they will ask us those questions, and we'd be like, man, weren't you watching us the last 10 years? No. So let's kind of go through these, and we'll talk about them. But what does it mean to be a biblical man? I think the first, couple lay the foundation, and, these would be the same for a woman too. But the first thing is a biblical man is a lover of God.
Yeah.
That is the great commandment, the greatest commandment, love God.
Yeah.
And the second half of that is
love others. So that, I mean, ultimately, as any person, male or female,
correct,
man or woman, this is our primary commands, is to love God first with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our might. That means every ounce of us. That doesn't mean we hold stuff back. And then to be a lover of others, to love other people.
Yeah. So even when I think of loving other people, if we look at it from, the church standpoint, we have, love your neighbors, which is those outside of the church, and then the new commandment, which is, love the body of Christ. So I kind of just wrapped all those up into.
Well, and if you think about the word love, right? Like love is a huge word. We'll say things like I love chocolate, or I love, my dog. Like that's not the same level of love we're talking about for God and for others. Loving something is not like loving God. It doesn't even use the word in the text to like God or be a fan of God. It says to love God, which means He is your desire. He is your passion. He is your, He is everything that you could want in God. And are we loving Him? And, we can get into that. Like, what does that look like?
That could be a whole podcast.
It could be a whole podcast, because I think a lot of men are just not lovers of God. They're just not. And so if they're not a lover of God, they really can't be a lover of others. Yeah. Because loving others flows out of our love for God. And there's a lot of men that sit in a church on Sundays or claim to be a Christ follower, that their true love is not God. Their true love is a woman. Their true love is a game system, Xbox, PlayStation. Maybe
what they do, their job.
What they do, they love their appetite. They love to eat. There's a lot of things, and that's going down the road of idolatry.
Yep.
And I think you talked about that a little bit on Sunday.
Yep.
About how there's idols in our lives, and if we're loving anything more than God, it becomes an idol.
It does. Well, it's things we don't even normally think of. It's not necessarily we're worshiping another god or a golden calf, but it's these things that pop up.
It's the things that consume your time and your energy and your thought life, and the things that are consuming you.
Yeah.
Is it God? Or is it something else?
Yeah. One of the things that we say a lot on our team here is, because our mission is go serve love, and you guys have heard us talk about that on our podcast, but we'll often say love is the engine that powers the going and serving, and that has to be first. We have to love God first. We have to love others inside and outside of the church.
Yeah.
So a biblical man loves God. He loves others. The third one is a biblical man is loyal.
Loyal.
I
think of a golden retriever.
I do think of a golden retriever too.
When I think of loyalty, I think of like golden retriever, or like a knight to his king.
Yep.
So what does that look like as a man?
Yeah, I think, to me, I think loyalty is almost like a lost art, right? Like I feel like you don't see it as much as you used to.
Yeah.
And I think you would kind of put this with commitment. It's kind of tied. Together there. But, when I think of a man, I think, are we loyal to our families? Are we committed to them? Are we loyal to, our workplace? Are we stabbing them in the back? Are we loyal? And you could just go on and on and on.
Yeah. Well, I think more of what is the object of our loyalty from that perspective, and it goes back to loving God, right?
Yeah.
But, we can be ultimately we should be loyal to God, but beyond that, our families, our workplace, those are two big things that a lot of times we're not seeing, especially in the workplace. Yeah. I mean, think about how many men that skirt around the edges or don't follow the rules or are hiding things. Maybe they're not writing down, exactly how much they spent on this trip, or they're buying meals out of company money, right? I mean, that's a big deal.
It is. One of the things I think of too is we talked about last week a little bit, but are we loyal to our friends? there's even some proverbs that talk about how, friends sometimes are even more loyal than a family member, right?
Yeah.
So lots there with loyalty. Let's move on to the next one. A biblical man is a servant, and he leads courageously. I love talking about this topic. I know we've hashed it out a lot on the podcast. I can't remember, what we've shared and what we haven't.
Yeah.
But Matthew 20:26 through 27, one of my favorite passages. I think I say that a lot, too. I have a lot of favorite verses. But whoever will be great among you must be your servant. And that's not the whole verse, but that's a phrase from it.
Yeah.
So how we lead is by serving people, by loving people. We need to do that courageously. We can't be cowards. We can't back down. We have to be willing to get in the messiness and the nitty gritty of life. And it's kind of junky sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't remember exactly if this is where Jesus is being asked by the disciples, who's the great, who's the great disciple? Is it a different spot? I can't remember. But I remember the disciples asking him, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest disciple?
Yeah.
And he gives them this rebuttal of, being a servant, being the least is what it means to be the greatest.
Yeah.
And it's if we can get that into our head, this is really hard for the guy who is a mechanic and he's not running the shop he's not running the shop. He's under the car, getting covered, working his butt off, getting paid less than the guy sitting in the office in the air conditioning. This is a hard thing for that guy or a guy in a similar role to grasp, to be a servant, and to serve where God has placed you, in your job, in your family, amongst friends, in the church. I mean, there's a lot of guys that aren't serving in their local church.
Yeah.
They're just not. They show up on Sundays and Wednesdays to attend and partake in the services, but you don't see them serving in their church in any other capacity. Yeah. And it's Jesus modeled servanthood for us. He modeled what it looked like to be a servant, and then to lead courageously. That's a tough one, because
it is.
I don't care who you are. There's a lot. Most men have a thing in them that wants to please other people, and even the ones that don't.
I'm a big people pleaser.
So when you want to be pleasing to people, it's hard to live courageously, because sometimes you're going to have to do things that make other people upset. You're going to have to do because it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Not because it's your personal preference, not because you're doing it just to spite somebody else, but you're going to have to make a decision that overall is the right decision.
Yeah.
I think of you leaving your insurance and coming to work at a church. That was a huge step of courageous living.
There's a lot of craziness there.
Yeah.
But it worked out great. It was awesome. Yeah, I even think of it in the context of our families, and even kind of back to the idol thing. Sometimes, as dads, as a biblical leader, as a biblical man, we have to call things out in our families that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So maybe that, I talked about it on Sunday, maybe it's sports a little bit.
Yeah.
And how sports can be an idol, and having those conversations with your family, hey, I know we all love this. I know we love doing this together, and it's a lot of fun, and we have great family time.
Yeah.
But is it taking priority over things?
Yeah, leading courageously is not the easiest thing to do, especially if there's any ounce in you that wants to please the people around you, whether it's your family, whether it's your team at your business, whatever it is that you're leading, wherever God has placed you to lead. Doing that courageously and doing the right thing all the time is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, we want to be liked. We want to be loved.
As a biblical man, that's what we're called to do.
Yep. Amen. That's good stuff. So let's move on to the next one. We talked a little bit about this, but a biblical man is kind, humble, and honest. Just a couple of passages there. Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit. That's Philippians 2:3. But in humility, count others more significant. I heard a really, really good definition of being humble. It was by, I think, Ed Welch. So he's not like super well known, but he's very well known in like the biblical counseling arena. So he's a big biblical counselor. And I was listening to a session he did at a biblical counseling session. And he said for an individual to be humbled, it means that they are settled under God. So we understand, we're under God and we're settled. We're confident in that. But in addition to being settled under God, we're settled among people. Like we don't have anything to prove. We don't have a fight to pick. We're settled among them.
Yeah.
And I love that definition of being
it's good.
Humble. Because I even think about my life. I mean, I worry about what people think. I want to make sure I say the right things. And, we should do, we want to be aware of that. But to be settled among people, that's tough.
Well, and I go back to the living courageously, leading courageously, and being kind, humble, and honest. Like, leading courageously doesn't mean bossing people around. It doesn't mean throwing your weight around. It doesn't mean,
Correct.
dropping the hammer on situations, because we're called to lead courageously, but we're also called to be kind, humble, and honest. And there's this, like, tension between those two things of leading and living courageously and being kind and humble, because a lot of times we can justify people pleasing because we're saying, oh, we're being kind, we're being honest, we're being humble, like, you know what I mean? But the reality is sometimes we're just not willing to be courageous. And so there's this constant, it's kind of a pendulum or a weight balancing act of leading and living courageously, but also being kind, being humble, and being honest, and having that spirit of kindness and spirit of humbleness, but also being willing to, occasionally hurt people in a nice way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Occasionally have to have a conversation with somebody or point out something in a loving, kind, humble, honest manner. That's a difficult thing to balance.
It is. And I think what I found in my life, if I'm being kind, if I'm being humble, if I'm, being gentle, any of those words that we want to use, and they see that consistently, right?
That's good.
Over and over and over.
Yeah.
You can be more courageous and call people out and do it in a way that's appropriate, and they respect it. They may not like it.
Yeah.
And the actual conversation, it might be a little bit tense, and there might be some back and forth. Even, I might get a little, edgy and, heated about the situation. Yeah. But if we're humble, we can step back and just have a really good conversation about
It's that principle of putting change in the pocket.
Yep.
If they're seeing a consistent theme of me being kind, humble, and honest, and they see me living, this example, then when we need to make those hard, courageous decisions, we hopefully we've put enough change in their pocket that, when we withdraw some, they're not going to feel empty, and they're not just going to feel 100% defeated.
Yeah, and I think, too, when you're kind, humble, honest about those situations, you can filter through, is this something that really needs addressed, or is this more of a personal preference? Is it something that just irritates me, or is it something that I'm kind of talking about a team environment that needs to be addressed because it's affecting everybody? And I think when we view it through that helps a lot too. But a lot we could talk about there, but let's move on to the next one. A biblical man is self-disciplined and responsible. 1 Timothy 4:7-8 says, "Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come." So I like the idea of training, right?
Yeah.
And self-discipline and responsibility. And, it's easy to say those words, but to be consistently self-disciplined in all the areas that God's calling us to be, a lover of Him. Are we consistently praying, fellowshipping, fellowshipping with him, spending time in God's. We could just go on and on and on there.
Well, and are we being self-disciplined in how we eat, what we're putting into our bodies, or how we are physical self-discipline? I know godly is more important, but there's also the physical self-discipline. Are we it's the word discipline, right? So discipline isn't fun. A lot of times, we're having to give ourselves a pep talk in the moment, or beat ourselves, our heads, our minds into submission, say, no, I need to do this because this is the right thing to do. This is what God's calling me to do. This is what's good for me. This is what's good for my family. Being self-disciplined is not easy.
It's not. But lots of ways we need to be disciplined. I don't think we really like talking about that one because neither of us have a lot to say.
Yeah, it kind of is what it is. Yeah. Everyone knows what it means. It's just, are you going to do it?
Yeah.
You have a decision. Am I going to do it, or am I going to make excuses to not do it?
Yeah. And this is where we get into what we talked about last week, right? Having mentors and other people in your life to help you stay accountable to what God's calling you to do.
Yeah.
And I could be like, hey, Michael, you shouldn't do that. Or, hey, Ben, what are you doing over there?
Well, and to be self-disciplined, to be responsible, takes work.
It does.
It's not easy. It's not. So many men want to check out of life and just go with the flow and kind of just, just live and just kind of walk through life. And being self-disciplined and being responsible takes work, and it takes effort. And, I saw a quote recently that said, oh man, I just lost it.
Come on, let's pull it out again.
Apathy makes excuses.
Yeah.
And passion finds a way.
Yeah,
apathy makes excuses, and passion finds a way. It's like apathy, laziness, not wanting, checking out of things, just kind of, getting home from work or getting home from church or whatever, and just sitting on the couch or going into your room to play video games or whatever.
So nice and relaxed.
It is. Yeah. But is it healthy? Is it good for your family? Is it good for your community? Is it good for your work? Is it, is it good? Because self-discipline is hard and it takes work.
Yep. So we got two more quick ones. A biblical man is full of integrity. And we kind of touched base on this, tied into another one.
A little bit.
I love this proverb. Again, another one of my favorite verses. Proverbs 10:9. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely. Yeah, that's powerful. But he who makes his ways crooked will be found out. Hey, when you don't do things the right way, it may work out for a day, it may work out for a few years, it may work out for a decade, but it will eventually catch up to you.
Well, and the other thing is too, even if it's a long time and you feel like you're getting away with it, whatever it is, it's eating away at you.
Yeah.
Because you know in your heart, you know in your mind that that's wrong. You know that. Yeah. And so it's going to eat away with it at you, even though you think you're getting away with it.
Yeah.
Even though you think that nobody knows, even though you think that this is just between me and God, the reality is if you're doing something wrong, it's going to eat away at the inside of you, and you're not going to be able to embrace and live in the freedom that the gospel has given us.
Yeah. I feel like when it comes to integrity, like this is one of the ways that God uses us to really grow us spiritually, because integrity is all about what we do a lot of times when nobody else can see us, right?
Yeah.
But when we can say yes to God and no to sin and have integrity, that strengthens our inner man. We're transformed, from one degree of glory to another, and that strengthens us so that the next time, we're even just more capable and more in tune with God and able to say no to, and that could look like a bunch of different things. That could be stealing something. That could be, pornography. That could be, other things in your private life.
Embezzling. Being dishonest about other things. Yeah. Lying.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, $5 here, $10 there, no big deal.
Yeah.
But it does affect you. Then last one, a biblical man perseveres. Galatians 6:9, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. There's definitely spiritual, eternal rewards there. And I think it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get tired. It's easy to get weary. Just talk about being a dad, right? I mean, there's so much to do. We're exhausted, tired. We want to maybe be passive. We want to be lazy at times. But if we persevere, keep striving forward, good things will come.
I think of a farmer. Farmers a lot of work. Well, it's not as much as it used to be because they got all these fancy machines now.
Yeah. Still a lot of hours, though.
But during that time, when this was written, because it's talking about, what's doing good in due season will reap, if we do not give up. And you think of farming and you and look at that analogy, and farming is a lot of work. Yeah. And it takes a long time, several months before you really see a harvest. In vineyards, it can take years. Yeah. In orchards, it can take years before you see a harvest, before you reap any of the benefits of your labors. Yeah. And so it's so easy to say, well, it's just not worth it. I can go buy apples at the store. I can go buy grapes at the store. Like we begin to realize like there's other things that we can do that maybe, and then this is just an analogy. Obviously, I'm not saying you can't buy apples from the store, but in our life, it might be easier. This is when I see with parents a lot. It's easier to grab a phone and put it in front of your kid's face and say, here, than it is to listen to them cry, listen to them whine, listen to them, not be happy about something. That's a big pet peeve of mine personally that I try really hard not to do.
And you guys do a good job.
Am I perfect at this? No. But I try really hard. Like even this morning, kids got up. I'm still asleep. Rachel brings in Cody Ray into my room. And the first thing I do, because I'm still asleep and trying to wake up, is I turn the TV on. I turn on Barney for 30 minutes. And I know that she's probably going to get another hour to 2 hours of TV today, just because we're in the terrible twos. We're in this season and we're trying really hard not to do that because it's so easy. Like it's going and getting an apple from the store instead of growing your own tree. But in the long run, if you can grow your own tree and you can reap the harvest off of that tree, you're not going to have to go to the store all the time. And it's that status of instant gratification instead of seeing longevity and seeing the end result in mind. And that's just one analogy. There's so many other things.
And even sticking with the farming thing, we have friends back in Illinois, a big tornado just whipped through, I forget how many acres, but a lot of acres. And they lost, all their crop in a certain area because of tornado. And as farmer, you persevere. You may have a bad couple years. You just never know. The ups and downs and trials and tribulations and things that will come.
Well, and you got to keep the long game in perspective, not the short here and now in the moment. You've got to think, what is this going to affect? How is this going to take place? What's going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? The decisions that I'm making today.
Got to persevere.
Yeah.
Well, man, I feel like I still got more stuff I want to say, but I know we're approaching half an hour here.
Yeah.
But as always, it's great hanging out with you guys every single Thursday. And today we wrestled with the question, what does it look like to be a biblical man? These are just a few of the things that we had talked about today. And next week, we're going to look at what does it mean to be a biblical woman. We'll have some guests join us to help us with that topic. So it'll be a great podcast. And as always, if you guys have things you want us to chat about, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we cannot wait to hang out with you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to the Lima Baptist Temple podcast. We hope you were encouraged today, and we would love to hear from you. If you have a prayer request, a topic you'd like us to discuss, or want to share what God is doing in your life, visit us online at limabaptisttemple.org.